Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Biotech Blueprint Podcast. My name is Katerina Roznik, and today's guest is Steve Swan, the CEO of the Swan Group, an executive search company specializing in talent acquisition for the biotech and pharma IT sectors. He's also the host of the Biotech Bytes podcast, where he invites industry leaders and explores how innovation and talent intersect in life sciences. Welcome, Steve, and thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Katerina. I'm excited
Yeah,
to be here.
thanks. So to kick things off, how would you describe the current state of hiring in biotech and pharma? And what trends are you seeing now compared to, let's say, like when you started on 10 years ago, or the COVID boom in hiring, if that's something that was, I think that was the case in biotech.
Yes. So the COVID boom has absolutely slowed down. I think we pulled a lot of demand forward, and there was a lot of slack that we had to work off, a lot of overhiring that happened.
Right.
There was a lot of funding that came into the industry,
Mhm.
and it dried up because interest rates skyrocketed so fast, so high, so fast. So that's slowed down. I'd say probably over the last 3 months or so, it's picked back up.
Okay.
And I think that the trend or trends that I'm seeing most recently are on both sides of the fence. AI, if I think everybody wants to get involved with the AI trade, right? So, from the hiring side, looking for folks with AI expertise, but using AI on the hiring process. We're human and we like to find shortcuts and make our days easier. And we've done that a lot with our technology. That's what technology is meant to do, right? Is to help us scale a little bit better and help us make us easier, better, faster at whatever we do. And supposed to help us take away some of the lower level tasks so our brains can be used for the higher level tasks. And I think that we are exploring with AI. And I think that right now it's being leaned on a lot in the hiring process. And so much so that I think it's I don't want to say becoming a hindrance, but it's
Okay.
for the folks trying to do the hiring. It's being used leaned on a bit too much.
So do you mean they want people to have experience with AI or
Well, so okay, yeah. So
companies?
when they're so the roles that they're looking for, some of them. So the most prevalent roles that folks are looking for are folks with AI, and there's not a ton of folks with AI. But now, so you have different areas within AI that folks would need experience with, right? So whether it's reviewing the clinical data, right, or helping you get through that data, or whether it's helping to get through just large amounts of data and analyzing it, or whether it's about helping you look through contracts or helping you clean your data, right? Those kinds of things. And by the way, AI is all driven by data. If you don't have clean data and good data going through it, you're in trouble. So yeah, I mean, from that perspective, from that side, yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of hiring going on. And then there are instances, unfortunately, where I'll get a call, and I've had it a couple times where they'll say, "Hey, listen, I need somebody involved with AI." Well, what does that mean? Well, I don't really know, but I just don't want to miss out. And quite frankly, I don't want to get involved with the fear of missing out hires, right? Because 3 months down the road, when that's the wrong person for the wrong solution for the wrong problem, I'm on the hook. They're upset with me, so I say thanks, but no thanks. But what I also meant was on the other side, the recruitment folks internally at some of the companies, they're getting so many applications for all this stuff because IT got hit so hard with whether it was Google or Meta or whether it was biotech and pharma. A lot of folks are on the street, right? And so whether they're the right fit or not for a role, they're throwing their resume. And so, for any role in 2 or 3 days, they're getting 1,000 applications.
So do you think that, because one of my questions was, do you think that people can use AI to sort of improve their resumes, to improve their searches, to, optimize their job searches? And so you're viewing this almost as a negative because it's just too
Well, no.
overwhelming.
So from that perspective, so we're now fighting AI with AI, right? So on the hiring side, they're using AI to identify the right
Sure.
candidates.
Right,
On
right.
the applicant side, we're using AI to, I think it seems to me, and I don't know this personally, to sort of generate and send out resumes, and lots of times they don't maybe send it to the exact roles that you're a perfect fit for because they don't know. It's just AI. I mean, like I started saying, the companies as they rely on AI to identify the folks. It seems to me, and I wrote an article about this on LinkedIn about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where I call it the work in the middle. So we can all identify folks, right? I can identify them, and we all probably have access to, I'm just going to say roughly 90, 95% of the same people by way of LinkedIn and our networks and stuff. The other 5 or 10%, maybe they're folks I've known for 20 years or whatever, but let's just call it 90%. So we all have access to the same folks and we can identify them. It's the work in the middle. It's what are you looking for in a personality of a company? What size company do you want? Hybrid versus non-hybrid dollars. What are you looking for? A lot of companies have shortcutted that, meaning that they're not actually even talking to folks. And then they think when they get to an offer, that's going to solve the problem. They're going to get a yes. And a lot of the calls I'm getting right now, Katerina, a disproportionate amount, I'd say 80% of them from hiring authorities are, hey, we've had 2, 3, 4 turndowns on this role. Can you help us? And I can draw a straight line to the ones that get those turndowns to the recruitment process being, I keep using the word shortcutted by just identifying folks with AI and not doing a lot of work in the middle to really suss it out as to what would be the right fit. And that's where they're missing out. And, folks are overworked, the recruitment folks, because they're working on a certain number of roles and it's expected that now they can handle more because they have AI, but they can't do that labor intensive conversation in the middle
Right.
before they get to the offer. And that's hurting the companies and it's hurting the process and it's hurting the candidates too. So,
Yeah, I didn't realize that was a thing now. Yeah.
yeah.
So do you think this is going to get better with AI getting better or?
So when I posted my article on the work in the middle, not getting done,
Mhm,
one of the things I mentioned in there was AI picking up on a pause, right, in
mhm,
someone's
yeah,
conversation. And one of my CIOs said, Steve, a pause could be a bad thing, right? They could look at this pause and they could say, well, that person paused when they were answering that question. That could mean that there's an AI would pick it up as a problem. And I shot back immediately and said, what if English is their second language? What if they
mhm,
were just pausing because they were thinking about the right word to insert in that sentence versus
yeah,
that's legit. I mean, and I don't know. You know what I mean? So
mhm,
is it going to get better? I think so, and I hope so. Is AI is certainly a great tool for helping to identify folks and candidates, and will it miss some? Sure, it'll miss some. But if you got 400 applicants and it slices it down to 20 good ones that
yeah,
fit, that's nice, right? That helps a
mhm,
lot.
mhm, mhm,
But that again, to go back to what I was talking about is that's really the first, I don't know, 1/30th of the entire process, is identification. Then you got qualification, then you got all that other stuff I mentioned, right? So I think it's going to get better. I think companies, again, hiring authorities are kind of wearing thin on it. That's why I'm getting the calls and them saying, 2, 3, 4 turn downs. We just got to get the right person. I got work to do. I got things that
yeah,
I got to get
yeah,
done.
yeah,
So, I don't know where it's going to land. I mean, I know that we all are enamored by AI, which I am
mhm,
too. We use it all the time, Chat GPT and such, but we got to know the limitations and we're learning them. Again,
mhm,
we don't even, this is like the beginning of the internet, talking about large language models and AI and all this different stuff. Lots of us aren't even speaking the same language like back at the beginning of the internet when we were talking about internet providers and web browsers and things like that. Now we all know what we're talking about when that comes out, but there are a lot of consultants out there that will even go into companies and help organizations from IT to executives to finance to just speak the same language. This is what we're talking about when we mention these
mhm,
things, so now we can all have a coherent conversation. So we're still even at that point.
mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. So, which roles would you say are now growing the fastest?
Well, I would say again, as a broad stroke, I would say the ones that are growing the fastest are anything having to do with AI. So
Yeah.
AI. Some of them, I mean, some of them crudely call them automation, right? But that more so the AI roles are coming in with
Mhm,
analyzing the data and cleaning up the data and tabulating the data. I mean, because we've got to get that. There's a lot of PE firms that are getting involved with data, right? Private equity firms, And the reason being is because they see if they can control some of the data. That's kind of the gasoline that runs through the AI motor, right?
Right.
You can't do
Yeah.
anything without correct data. So, it's like having a great looking car sitting in your driveway. If you don't have gasoline for it, it's not going to work, right? The data they see as the petroleum of our generation. And so, you know, a lot of the data roles and a lot of the AI roles, but definitely the data roles are big ones as well, right now, whether it's data engineer, data, whatever it is, data architecture, because everybody's got to get their data in order. When on my podcast, when I talk to my CIOs and such on there, one of the things I ask some of them, if they have any advice for smaller company CIOs or new CIOs, and for the most part, they say get your data ready, get that ready to run through AI because that's where we are and that's where we're heading, without a doubt.
So now let's talk a bit about career advice because I think a lot of my listeners are interested in this topic. And I know you worked with everyone from, I'm sure, new graduates to senior executives. What's your advice for someone that is breaking into biotech or industry right now, whether they're an undergrad, a PhD, or somewhere in between?
So I would say first and foremost, get involved somehow with data, if you can, right? But beyond that, from a personality perspective, I've had some folks that I've talked to about, as folks are climbing the ladders, what are some of their hindrances, right, to get to that next level and things like that. Communication's huge. Communication's gigantic. So if you can communicate with the business, understand that you're working with the business to solve business problems. It's not technology for technology's sake or data for data's sake. It's you got to understand, just like going on a road trip, right? You know where your destination is. If I'm going to your house, I got to know your exact address, where we're heading, right? I got to know where I'm starting from, which is where I am, right? So but I got to know where I'm heading. I got to know where I'm going, and I got to know how to get there. So when you talk to business and understand what they need and what their goals are, that's when you really understand, what technology is going to do for them. So you really got to get in with the business first and foremost, and really understand what they need and what their drivers are. So be able to walk and talk like a business person, whether that's supply chain, whether that's scientists, whether that's commercial sales folks, whatever it is, and whatever your technologies are, to then, because the technology, they almost don't care about that. They're here and they want to get here, so they know their destination, right? Now it's your job to help them walk along that path and get to their eventual destination by way of your technology. So they show you the roadmap, you come up with the strategy to get them there, with your technology. So really be able to talk with technology, tell your story, tell a story, but do it without bits and bytes and do it without deep conversations within technology. The best folks that I've seen and that climb the ladder are the good storytellers and are the good communicators. Those are the ones that business like the most, and those are the ones that the business will trust the most, because if you can walk and talk like them, they're going to love you. I have one gentleman I placed in a VP of commercial technology role. I swear every time I talk to him, my IQ goes up 3 points. He will talk for 40 minutes, right? Talks about the patients at the center, talks about how drugs get to the patient, how the drugs are created, the science behind them, and then the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, he'll talk about his commercial technology and how that helps to deliver the drugs or gets everything to the patient. And for him, it's not about the technology, it's about that whole journey and getting them there. And oh, by the way, from a technology perspective, this is how I'm going to make that happen. So my advice is don't be a pure technologist. Understand the technology, because there's a big place for that. I have a daughter who's graduated with a data science degree recently, and she's always said, I don't want to be a behind the scenes programmer. And I've told her that if you are a behind the scenes programmer with all technology, you're probably going to get outsourced. So get in with the business, and help them to understand that. And she gets that from day one. So I think everybody needs to think about that, understand that, and become that expert in that one area of the business. And there'll be a place for you, because technology, as we know, isn't going anywhere. It's just going to scale and make everybody that much better, faster, and smarter. And AI is part of that, big part of that now.
Yeah, that's great. And also, for someone who's just starting and sort of getting into the, industry, Would you recommend that it's better to search for a role that fits you best, or would you say that it's better to go to a company that you prefer or you think would be best for you and then sort of try to find your space in that within the company, or
That's a
which
good
way?
question. Search for the role or search for the company, right? And that's something that I'm struggling with at home with my daughter right now. She worked for a small company. She learned some things, although there wasn't a lot of technology there
Mhm.
that was being spread around, and she had to learn it, which was great for her. Now she's thinking about a larger company that maybe has a program. A lot of folks are trying to direct her towards maybe getting involved with one of the consulting firms where you can
Right.
get exposed to a lot of things. Because as a 22, 23-year-old, 21-year-old, however old you are coming out of school, you don't really know. You think you may know what you want. I mean, everybody knows exactly what they want that day, but that could change, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And if you get exposed to a lot of different things, again, thinking about the company, then that's a good thing, right? Those management training programs, or again, a consulting company where you get exposed to a lot of things. So my recommendation is that a young person get involved with those, an internship or training
Mhm.
programs inside the consulting firms because it exposes you to a lot of different things. Sometimes if you shoot for the company, and you get inside a particular organization, it's like going to a small school, right? When you went to school, if I can use that analogy, if you go
Mhm.
to a small school that only does business, and let's say halfway through your degree, you don't want business, you want, I don't know, to be a teacher. I am just making something up. You can't do that. You got to switch schools or companies. So if you go to a larger company that has what I call larger menu of opportunities, especially one that has training programs, like a consulting company or something, that's I think great for your first step or first couple steps to learn a lot. That's my thought.
That's
You know.
great. Yeah, thanks. And then for someone like mid-career professionals, how do you suggest that they stay relevant and competitive in this fast changing sector?
Yeah, it changes a lot. I mean, again, hopefully by that point, if you're mid-career, you've picked your niche, you're in
Uh-huh.
your thing, and you can't ever underinvest in yourself because nobody can take that away from you, right? If
Uh-huh.
you invest in yourself, whether it's taking classes, whether it's taking certifications, always be open to talking to people, right? I think first and foremost, I know this sounds silly and it sounds so easy and it's free. People are always reaching out. You and I reach out and we talk, right? I mean, and it's just a
Yeah.
conversation. You and I are learning from each other every sentence we say,
Uh-huh.
and I think that's invaluable because there are so many folks in the world and in the everywhere that would just be open for a conversation. I find some folks aren't open for those conversations. They think they're guarding something or they have something to hold on to, which they probably do, but you don't have to talk about that if it's something you got to hold
Uh-huh.
on to. I do find that the more senior this is interesting. I found over the years the more senior folks are, the
Uh-huh.
more apt they are to just say, "Hey, what's up? How are you?" If you've ever cold called people, which at some point some of us have, some of us haven't, the more senior somebody is, the more nervous someone is usually to call them. But those are the coolest people to talk to because they got there for a reason. Whether I don't know which it is. Were they open to talking to a lot of folks, or are they only open to talking to folks now that they're more senior? Either way, it's interesting to me that the more senior they are, the more open they are. The more junior someone is, the more clammed up they are. Maybe they're a little more nervous about what they know and don't know.
Uh-huh.
But my first piece of advice for them would be to make sure you stay open to conversations
Yeah.
and don't say no to a conversation because you never know what's around that next bend.
Uh-huh.
Again, my daughter who's just out of school, having her network and just chat with folks is tough, right?
Uh-huh.
Because she's like, well, I don't know anything and this and that. Well, you do, you know something, and you always learn from talking to folks, always.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So that's my
Yeah.
biggest piece of advice.
That's great. And also from personal experience, I graduated my PhD not long ago. And so I was sort of sheltered in the academia world a little bit. And then when I wanted to go get my network outside in the industry, I think that post COVID, it's been really helpful to be on LinkedIn and platforms like that. I think people really engage there in conversation.
They do.
And like you said, I've been able to talk to a lot of people. People are really nice in general, they'll offer advice, they'll be willing to meet up with you. So I agree with that. That's also one advice that I always give to people that
Yeah,
ask me. In
and
general, I think for it goes for everybody, not just mid-career, but
right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And, but that's one thing that it's tough for people.
yeah, yeah.
It's real tough for people. And I guess, by the way, you just reacted. Yeah, it was tough, right? So,
Yeah, it's not easy, but it's not as hard as it sounds sometimes,
I
I think.
know it's hard to convince somebody of that. I'm trying to convince my daughter that people would, they don't mind if they're not going to offer a conversation to you if they don't really want to talk to you, right?
Right. Yeah,
And
exactly.
everybody's got a different angle on things, and everybody's grew up a different way, and everybody's got a different thought about different things, and that's why when I do my podcast, I'm asking folks almost the exact same questions, but
Mhm.
everybody's got a different thought on something. So anyway, it's that's
I read somewhere, I don't know if this is true, but I think it said about 70% of jobs are filled, I guess, job positions by your network, meaning, most people will get a job if they,
it's higher
from
than that.
someone you maybe talked to, you were exposed to, you chatted, you met with them for a quick coffee, even over Zoom, right? And then you're more likely to get a job that way. So I don't know if it's true, if it's 70% really, but that's what I read somewhere, I think on
It's higher
LinkedIn.
than that.
Is
Yeah.
it?
So
Okay.
yeah. So I would say 15 years ago, I read in the Wall Street Journal that it was if the role was over $100,000 role, it was closer to 90%. And especially today, right? Because they get so many
Right?
applications. That's one of the things I write about is that there's so many applications. And LinkedIn counts them. They show you a little counter of how many people have applied for that role, and that just overwhelms people who are applying. They're like, oh, I'm out. And one of the things I tell folks all the time, and this goes back to sort of just talk to people, is look through your connections or look through the folks that know folks that you know on LinkedIn. Again, it's not natural for folks to do,
Mhm.
but that's how you get to maybe know somebody and somebody can help you. They'll say, okay, go ahead and apply, and I'll make sure your resume gets in front of Steve, who's the hiring manager, or whatever, or however that may go. But referrals from folks are great. I mean, we're the same thing. We're paid networkers, right? Because I've been networking for 26 years, just doing what I do, and lots of times I know managers, and so they want folks that come to them that are recommended or more comfortable, right? Because if Katerina recommends them, well, I know her and I've known her for years, and I like what she does, so this is somebody I at least got to think about or talk to, not the other 278 applicants that came in because I don't know them. They're just a resume to me. So yeah, 100%. Networking. It's just again, it just keeps going around, and the world's too small, and life's too short. So don't burn bridges. That's another piece of advice I have.
Yeah.
There's so many people that burn bridges, and they're like, I don't need to. I don't know. Show up at this company when I accepted the offer, or I can reject this, or I don't need to call them back or email. It's going
Mhm.
to come back to you. So just everything we learned from what you and I are talking about right here, we knew coming out of first grade. Just be nice to people, return the calls. It's amazing to me, and this blows me away every time I hear it, that people say to me, "I can't believe you actually return calls or you answer the phone." Like, really? Like people don't do that? So it's again, small world, life's too short, and do how you would want to be treated. Do that to others, and you'll be fine. You know.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I'm
Um,
getting
yeah, no, that's good.
you know,
Uh,
like a
yeah.
post-it note.
So how often, this is another question I think that comes up a lot when I talk to people I know is how often do you think you should switch companies and how long should you stay at one company? I know it's probably different for different sectors and it changed, I think, also over time. Back in the
Yes, it
day, I think
is.
it was better to be at a company for a longer time, but I don't know. What is your take on that?
Okay, so I was gonna hit on what you just said first. It's shrunk. It's probably halved. It's gone in half since I started in this business. 6 years was, 5, 6 years was something folks would look for. Now, if you've been there 2 to 3, they're like, yeah, it's cool. We're good.
Yeah.
So it depends on what your angle is. If you want to stay at a company and own it and grow it and do something, 6, 7, 10 years is still a long time,
Mhm.
but that's fine. If you're there 2 or 3 years, you're in good shape too. I do hear from folks that have been at a company too long, and I see it too. So somebody that's been at a company 7, 8, 10 years, their salary hasn't kept up with somebody that's moved, several times within that time frame. So, it depends on what you want and what you're looking for. Is it a money move? Because you don't know what you don't know on the other side. So that's when you really got to do your homework and understand what you're getting into from that perspective. Now, you always want to, and I had this conversation yesterday with somebody, you always want to move towards something, a better opportunity, right? You don't want to run from something. If you do, that means you made the wrong decision, and don't repeat that decision-making process. Don't jump into something too fast, or maybe lots of times folks go for just the money and they're in a spot where someone's like, well, I'm overpaying you so I can make you do all this. And that's true, right? They in one sense, sort of own you, right? They make you travel or they make you come in 7 a.m., whatever, you know what I mean? So if you move every 2 or 3 years, you're going to keep up from a dollar perspective, but you're not going to have that career longevity. And, it's like trading stocks. I mean, do you know you're buying the right stock after that? You really got to assess that and understand what you're getting into, so. But it's not uncommon to make those moves. I don't think there's a golden rule that says you should move this often, but
Yeah.
2, 3 years, it's not going to get looked at unfavorably on your resume. Yeah.
It's good to know. Yeah, thanks. I know we talk a little bit now about once you get the job, but if we can go back to optimizing the job search, we talk a little bit about AI and how you can utilize it to how you can use it as a tool to help you maybe streamline the process of applying for jobs and getting jobs. And I know firsthand that now it's much easier to maybe tailor your resume to a specific role that you're looking for than it used to be before, where you were able to apply to so many more jobs, which also is a downside for the hiring team. But a question also I get a lot for the job search part is about the CV and the resume for people in any stage of a career. So how long should it really be? I know resume is the longer one, right? CV is the shorter, or is no, other way around.
I don't know. You know what? I never even, yeah, I don't know.
But for example, let's say you're coming from, you're going to biotech, you have a master's, you have a PhD, maybe you have or you've been on publications, you've been to, conferences, you've done this and that.
Well, so the research resumes will tend to be longer because the last 2 pages are all.
But is that relevant for the industry? Like, do they want to see that
Well, it depends. Depends on the role you're going for, right? If they need to know all the research publications you've had. And listen, each one of those, you put a ton of work into.
Sure.
Put that on there. That's what I say. Listen, when someone comes to me, first of all, the longer resumes tend to be the consultants. They put on all their projects, and they've each been 6 months, and they list everything they've done. You can consolidate that if it's a lot of the same stuff you've done in each role. You can list out what you've done, and then meaning what companies and the time frame you were there, and then put more of the bullets of the things you've done, because a lot of them are redundant, right? So you shorten up your resume. If a resume is I always say this, telling a good story, right? So if I show career progression, such like that, I'd send a 4-pager. I'd even send a 5-pager. I'm fine with that. But if it's redundant, it's not telling a great story, or it looks jarbled, I wouldn't send that. 3 pages is nice, but it doesn't. Again, I'm not big on hard, fast rules. A lot of gray with me. That's my kids. It's to have a 3, 4 pager if you're telling the right story, a good story to that hiring manager. I think you're in good shape. It doesn't matter. Resumes, again, should tell that right story, but with the research, with the R&D, they're going to be a lot longer because it lists out a lot of that stuff again, and that's okay. So I don't have an issue with that at all.
Okay, so I know you focus a lot on IT. I mean, that's your main thing. But can you walk us through the main categories of jobs that you see in biotech and pharma today, like research, IT, data science, regulatory, commercial?
Well, so R&D IT is a big one, right? You got commercial IT, which is another big one. You get infrastructure, which is another big one. Now, infrastructure is going to include, all your cloud and a lot of your automation, things like that. Then you got security, IT security, cyber. Again, all these will have a component now of AI involved with them, right? So security on the operations side for monitoring incidences, right? They've got AI, back to back to R&D and back to commercial IT. AI is going to help with those, right? To help, they have a ton of data to get through. So you've got to use your AI to figure out and to collate it and to, come up with your geographic data for your marketing and commercial side and things like that. And on your research side and your clinical side, especially, you're going to have AI utilizing that. So AI kind of is going across the whole spectrum. But from a category perspective, you got your R&D, you got your commercial, you got your infrastructure, you have your supply chain or ERP, whatever you want to call it. Then you have a lot of the different G&A functions, general and administrative. You've got finance, you got legal, things like that, HR, right? That are all part of the corporate systems. And again, AI pokes its head into all those, so that's kind of the new entrant into all these. And then you have somebody that's got to handle the data, and the data's got to be constantly maintained. Some folks or some companies leave it alone. They think they get it in shape, and then they can leave it, and after, sometimes 6 months, a year, it's kind of in shambles again, and then they have to go in and make it, clean it up again. So they always have to stay on top of that. And that's another call I get from some managers in some places. They say, my senior level folks that are doing my data science work or my analytics work are having to triage my data because the data is not working for them. And you can bring in lower level folks. Like I said, my daughter, data science coming out of college, they would gladly do that. And that's what I was talking to one gentleman at a large biotech about 6 months ago. I said, if you set up some sort of minor league or training program where they would come in the data cleansing. Now, their mind's going to go numb in 2 years or a year and a half, but tell them it's a 1.5, 2 year program, and then we're going to, you have the opportunity to transfer to another area in the company or to this kind of role. I think a lot of companies would be well advised to do something along those lines so that A, they keep their data in shape, and B, they keep a nice pool of fresh talent coming into the organization, and then that way they can learn the organization and learn what they do because they're staring at the data, whether it's R&D,
Right.
commercial marketing, whatever it is, So
Yeah, that's
I don't
great.
know if I answered your question or not. I
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, that's
shut off
perfect.
on a tangent there. Sorry.
Thank you. So the last set of questions I have, I think, is something that's of interest to many people, but maybe confuses a lot of people. And that's stock compensation and equity. And I think that at least from my background, I think is a complete enigma to a lot of people. Can you walk us through a little bit on like stock options or equity and how does that typically work, particularly like private companies?
So you've got several different kinds of equity you can get, but for the most part, you're going to get offered either options
Hmm.
or RSUs, right?
Hmm.
So first and foremost, whatever you get, it's usually going to have a vesting period, right? So the vesting period means you have a certain time frame that you get control over whatever you get. So let's put aside for a second whether they're options or RSUs. The vesting period means if you get 100 whatever you're getting 100 of whatever, and they have a 3 year vesting, that means a third of those things vest and become yours, and you have control of them for or at that time frame. So if it's over a 3 year time frame, a third of them become yours on that anniversary over a 3 year time frame, and then after 3 years you have total control over them. Okay, so that's a vesting period. Then you have your strike price, right? When it comes to options, really, but you have a price or a purchase price. So an option is just what it sounds like. It's giving you the option to buy shares in a company. So let's make it up. You get 100 options that vest over 3 years at $5. I'm just making up the strike price, right? So that means that over 3 years, a third of these options become yours, and and you have the option to buy shares in your company at $5. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that if your stock is not trading above $5, they're worthless.
Sure.
So if it's at $5 or below $5, no reason to buy them because now you have the option. You have the option to buy those shares at $5. But if it's at $7, you can immediately buy them at 5 and sell them at 7, right? The options are options, giving you the ability, just the option to buy those shares. And
Right.
you don't have to exercise them. You would automatically get control of them as they vest a third, a third, a third. But if it stocks at $4, then
Sure.
there's no
Not
reason to
worth
buy
it.
them because you'd
Yeah.
lose money, right? The second piece or kind of compensation typically are RSUs. And RSUs simply are stock grants. They're giving you stock. So the RSU, the R part, the restricted part, is just the vesting period, which we just talked about with options. Remember, we mentioned options,
Right.
third, a third, a third. Now, some companies do, your first portion vests after a year, then they start vesting monthly after that or quarterly after that. They all do different time frames. Some of them do a 4-year vesting period, so a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, right? But RSUs are stock grants. Now, what does that mean? That means that they're giving you stock at
Right.
zero, no cost to you. So when the vesting period happens, you are just given. It shows up in your account. You're given, if again, 100 shares. Let's say it's 100 shares that vests over a 3-year time frame. You're getting a third on year one. 33 and a third shares are given to you at a zero stock price, at a zero price, just given to you. Now you do have to pay tax on that because they gave those to you,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they're restricted stock and it's stock grants. And so if the stock's trading at a penny or above, you've just made money,
Hmm.
But you'll usually get less RSUs than you will options. Okay. So
I just have a follow-up on this. So, at what stage or level you usually should expect to receive them, either of these?
any level, if a company, yeah, well, the higher the level, the more you get. Yeah.
Right, right.
So if I work with any organization, they'll expect to give those to from an analyst to the CIO. But again, it's different amounts for each company. And most of the companies that it's easy to look at or easy to see are the public companies. So for the most part,
Hmm.
you're going to get those from the public companies. And some of them do, well, most do one or the other, either options or RSUs. When a company's earlier in its life cycle, they're going to do options, but some companies do either or. Most companies do either or. Some will give you the option. Very few will give you the option between options and RSUs.
Hmm.
Some will switch from one to the other, options to RSUs. Some will give you 50% and 50% because you don't know which way it's going to go. And I kind of like that for the
Yeah.
candidates, because the options have more juice to them because you're
Uh-huh.
going to get more of them and it's sort of leveraged. It's a leveraged bet, but the RSUs are money in hand, really. So
Yeah. Thing is that there's this perception, at least in places like Silicon Valley, that the equity is where the upside is.
yeah.
And I sometimes feel like that in biotech, or at least in going to the scientist route in biotech,
Uh-huh.
is maybe the structure can be a little less transparent. So what advice would you give to make sure that they're fairly rewarded for the impact that they're having? Because when you think about it, they're the people in the trenches, right, doing all the work. And maybe, yeah, like I said, it might not be always the most transparent in terms of.
So this can be a place, and I know I'm about to go back to something we just talked about. This can be a perfect place where somebody's been networking, they've been talking to
Right.
folks. They can get in touch with some of their other scientist buddies. Hey, they just offered me 1,000 options at $6, and that's what, because usually your option price, your strike price is going to be wherever the stock's trading at when you enter the company, right? When you get there. If it's a private company, to your point, it's a lot less transparent. I know a
Mhm.
lot of people that have gotten burned on those. And, private companies, it's really tough to get transparency and it's really tough to make money on that. Because think about it, if there's a couple scientists that own the company and they're offering, RSUs, right, or options in the company, I mean, there's nothing keeping them from selling off an asset, even if you do own part of that company, because they control it. They can sell off an asset and they could say, okay, now your stock value, I don't know, I'm just going to make it up, went from $1.50 down to zero point zero 0.07 cents, right? Because we sold this asset off. Now and you had no control over that. But if it's a public company, it's a little different, right? So, private company's tough
Mhm.
to get transparency in. However, leaning on some of your buddies and friends that or have met through the industry, I think is always a good way to hear how they're getting compensated from an equity perspective. But, a company, a young company, a small company, a company with less financial means, or a company that wants to hold on to their cash, they actually have cash and want to compensate you more on the equity side, which a lot of
Mhm.
them do. I mean, it's a risk, right? It's a risk on both sides. It's a risk for the employer hiring them. It's a risk for the employee. If you're a little further along in your career and you have a little cash and you want to take that risk, that's kind of on you. But think about it this way too. The small company, that's their currency. They're writing, they're basically giving you their dollars, right? And that's the currency. They just underwrote their currency to you, and it's their risk and your risk together, and hopefully it works, you know? So
Mhm.
it's kind of it's tough. I mean, there's no good answer right there. There really isn't, you know. But the companies will try and compensate you. I'm working with a guy right now. Spoke to him last night till 10 at night. I was doing a Zoom with him, and he's got me helping him look for some folks, and he's gonna give them. He said, as you can imagine, Steve, I'm gonna be heavy on the equity and light on the compensation because he's brand new. This is literally a company of 5 people, you know. So
Yeah,
um,
so yeah, high risk, high reward for
yeah.
someone coming
You
into.
hope, you know, and again, it's another, you know, lean on your buddies. How reliable is this person? How trustworthy are they? And what have they done in the past? You know, they've so this. Some people have sold one, two, three companies. Well, how have they treated the people that worked with them, right, or for them? Are those people with them in the new company? Not that that's a direct correlation, but they came with them at the new company, so that means they don't have a bad taste in their mouth from the last company. You know, again, you can do all this anecdotal stuff. You can look at what people say. I take that for part of what is really going on, but what they really do is what you got to watch. And actions speak louder than words. Again,
Mhm.
learn that in kindergarten, first grade. We're back to that, right? So.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, that's all I have for today. Any final thoughts?
No, I think that was good. If anybody wants to hear more, you know, check out Biotech
Yeah.
Bytes or, ping me on LinkedIn, you know, and
Hmm.
we can
Hmm.
chat.
Yeah, I can share the link to your podcast also
Okay, cool,
with my listeners. Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much for joining Biotech Blueprint and for sharing your knowledge. It was great.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah,
Thank you for having
yeah,
me.
yeah. Thank you.